everyone, and welcome to the Moss Landing Marine Lab's virtual volunteer appreciation event and data workshop. We're super grateful to have this opportunity to reconnect with you all and provide some updates from the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program here at Moss Landing Marine Labs. My name is Rachel Brooks, and I'm the lead field scientist here at MLML, and I'll be moderating today's meeting. We're also joined today by our two fearless leaders here at Moss Landing, Principal Investigators Dr. Scott Hamilton and Dr. Rick Starr, as well as CCFRP's postdoc, Dr. Shelby Ziegler, our volunteer coordinator, who you guys have all been chatting with, coordinating to get to this meeting, Jackie Mohay, as well as science crew members Jake Todd, Katie Seary, and Kinsey Matthews. Finally, we're also lucky to be joined by Mike Esgrove from the Ocean Protection Council and Sarah Warden from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So thank you guys for joining. And thank you to all our wonderful volunteers for Zooming in today and joining our meeting. Before we get started, I wanted to outline some guidelines for today's workshop. So all participants should be muted throughout the workshop. So please don't attempt to unmute yourselves. There will be an opportunity at the end of each section for folks to ask questions or make comments. And during that time, if you do have a question, feel free to use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you. You can also, if you do have a question that comes up throughout the presentation, you can use the chat feature and type in your question and send it that way. So this workshop today is dedicated to the memory of Hap Gladstone, an avid fisherman and dedicated CCFRP volunteer. His friends and family made a donation on his behalf to support the program and the workshop. And this workshop today is in memory of him and is also in celebration of all our wonderful volunteer anglers, as this program would not be possible without your participation and support. So we just want to take this moment to thank you all. And before we dive into things, I want to briefly go over the outline for today's workshop. So to start us off, I'll give you some background on CCFRP and provide some updates from the 2020 field season. I'll then pass the presentation over to Shelby, who will discuss some general trends we're seeing in our Central California and statewide data. And then Jake will walk us through some tag recapture highlights from the 2020 season. We'll then have Mike and Sarah from the OPC and DFW give us a brief presentation on how long-term monitoring groups like CCFRP will contribute to the 2022 MPA management review. And then we'll wrap things up with some angler statistics, as well as our Central California 2021 fishing regulations. And to get things started, it wouldn't be a volunteer appreciation event if we didn't have some CCFRP swag to give away. So throughout today's meeting, we'll have these spin the wheel slides hidden throughout the workshop, where we'll be raffling off some CCFRP gear. So we're going to start things off today with our first raffle spin. And the lucky winner of this first round is going to be winning one of our brand new CCFRP net gaiters, modeled here by deckhand Mike C. from the Bully Cat and volunteer angler John C. So with that being said, I'm going to bring the wheel in. So we have everyone who registered or who RSVP to this meeting. We added your name to our spinning wheel. And let's see who our first winner is going to be. Awesome. Right on S, congratulations. You just won yourself a net gator. So congratulations. Jackie is going to be sending you an email shortly. She'll coordinate getting or shipping you your prize. Okey doke. Well, let's dive in. So to give you a little background on the program, California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program was started back in 2007 by Dr. Rick Starr from Moss Landing Marine Laboratories and Dr. Dean Wendt from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo when the Central California Network of Marine Protected Areas was first implemented. And this program was devised with a variety of inputs from the fishing community, folks in academia, and resource managers, and essentially utilizes standardized hook and line catch and release surveys to monitor marine protected areas. And the overall goal of our project is to conduct scientifically sound research with the intent of using these data for fisheries management and MPA monitoring. And we just completed our 14th season this last fall. And we're eagerly getting ready for our 2021 season, or 15th season, coming up this next fall. So stay tuned for our fishing schedule. So a little history on the implementation of the MPAs and why our project got started. So the Marine Life Protection Act was passed in 1999 and required the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to reevaluate existing MPAs and design new MPAs that together would function as a statewide network. And so the goal was to increase cohesiveness and effectiveness at protecting and preserving the state's marine life, habitats, and ecosystems. And marine protected areas, or MPAs, are a public trust. And as such, there are many different kinds of MPAs in order to balance the needs for multiple uses like fishing, boating, etc., with conservation priorities. And not all MPAs in each region are no-take reserves. So we have state marine reserves, otherwise known as SMRs, which are fully protected, and all commercial and recreational harvest is prohibited. We also have state marine conservation areas, or SMCAs, where there's limited recreational or commercial extraction allowed. There are also state marine parks, or SMPs, where recreational harvest is also permitted. And then we compare that to our reference sites, or REF, which are areas open to recreational and commercial fishing, subject to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's rules and regulations. And so in our program, we focus on comparing one or more of the MPA distinctions with reference areas. And why should we monitor MPAs? Well, it's a priority adopted by regional stakeholders, and it's required by the Marine Life Protection Act to ensure that all goals are being met. It's also critical to enabling adaptive management. So much of the success and effectiveness of MPAs is based on how they're monitored and enforced. And changes that occur and are detected can help to better inform adaptive management of those MPAs. And because there's so many stakeholders involved in the creation and upkeep of California MPAs and the regulations, it makes sense to use a collaborative approach to monitoring and to involve and inform as many parties as possible. And collaboration, as you all know, is fundamental to the success of our program in so many aspects and extends to our partner institutions, the charter boat captains that we work with, the fishing community, resource managers, the general public, et cetera. And some of the benefits include engaging stakeholders in both the science and management. It also allows us to utilize different areas of expertise to develop protocols and collect data, as well as creates a shared understanding of resources and facilitates communication among user groups. And through collaboration, we're able to reduce costs associated with data collection and stretch our funds even further to gather more data for MPA monitoring and fisheries management. But overall, one of the main benefits of collaboration is to engage with the local community to educate and increase general understanding of nearshore fishes and increase conversation and stewardship ethics. So here's a schematic of the California coastline divided up into their respective MPA regions. The first group to be established was right here in Central California with 29 MPAs in 2007, so right when CCFRP got started. And as mentioned previously, it's important to note again that not all these protected areas are no-take reserves. Their take is permitted in some areas as well as other recreational activities. So Central California was then followed by the northern region with 45 MPAs established between 2010 and 2012. And then Southern California with 50 MPAs established in 2012. And due to the success of the 10 years of data collection in the Central California area by Moss Landing and Cal Poly, we were encouraged to expand this program statewide. And now we have 6 total academic institutions that help to survey MPAs across all California management regions. So I'm going to walk you through a schematic of our sampling design. So both Moss Landing and Cal Poly are responsible for sampling that Central California region. And for Moss Landing, the two areas that we survey are Año Nuevo and Point Lobos. And Cal Poly surveys Piedras Blancas and Point Bouchon. So each of these areas is separated into two sites, our MPA site and our reference site. And within each of the MPA and the reference sites, we have established a number of different grid cells. And the location of these grid cells are numbered and fixed so that we can resample the same place year after year. And on a given sampling day, we'll randomly select 4 grid cells to go visit. And then within those respective grid cells, we'll randomly select, within those randomly selected grid cells that we pick, we'll aim to complete 3 15-minute drifts for a total of 45 minutes of fishing within a given cell. So to give you a different visual, here are maps of the two areas that Moss Landing surveys, so Año Nuevo and Point Lobos, as I mentioned. The red shaded area on each of the maps outlines the MPA, and the red boxes depict our fixed grid cells inside the MPA, while those blue boxes depict our fixed grid cells in the reference areas, so the areas open to fishing. And as mentioned before, these grid cells are fixed in space so that we can come back and sample the same sites year after year. And during each fishing drift, we record information such as the number of anglers fishing, the total time spent fishing, as well as taking various GPS coordinates to track our fishing drift. For every fish caught, we'll identify it to species, measure and record the total length, as well as take note of the fish's general condition. And if the fish is in good condition and not showing any signs of barotrauma, we'll tag the fish with a unique numbered T-bar floy tag as pictured right here, and record that number and prior to releasing the fish. And as a lot of you know, a large portion of what we encounter on our trips in Central California are rockfishes. And there are over 70 species in the Northeast Pacific and more than 100 species worldwide. And they can inhabit extremely deep depths, but are also commonly found in the nearshore habitats that we typically survey. And rockfishes are very long-lived and slow to mature. Some species, like the yellow eye rockfish, living to reported ages of 150 years. So vermilion rockfish, a species that we commonly survey in the Central California region and pictured on this slide, have been reported to live to at least 60 years of age, oftentimes not becoming mature until they reach about 15 to 19 inches long at around 5 to 9 years old. And the largest, to give you kind of a perspective, the largest vermilion rockfish that we've caught on our MLML CCFRP trips was about 23 inches and predicted to be between 25 and 30 years old. So this just kind of reinforces why a long-term monitoring project like ours is so important, so that we can detect changes in populations that can happen over a long time period. And because our work is catch and release, one of our main goals is to maximize survivorship of the fishes we catch. So to do so, we sample in less than 120 feet of water. We'll crimp down the barbs of our fishing hooks to minimize any hook damage to the fish. So to give you an example, here's a picture on the bottom right of a barbed hook with a crimped hook next to it for comparison. We also train all of our science crew members to properly handle fishes with care. And we try to keep surface time to less than 5 minutes. And in most cases, a lot of the fish that do come on board are processed within a minute or two. We also regularly replace the seawater in our holding tubs and buckets to ensure that fishes are being placed in cool, oxygenated water. And although tagging is one component of our program, we only tag fishes that are in good condition, so as to not add any additional stress. And as a lot of you might know, rockfishes sometimes experience barotrauma. And essentially, this is when the gases within their swim bladder, depicted here, And other organs expand with a change in pressure as it's reeled up from depth. And oftentimes we'll see a rockfish with a stomach protruding out of its mouth, so kind of pictured here. So as that swim bladder expands, it takes up a lot of the space in the cavity of the rockfish, forcing that stomach out through its mouth. Other signs of barotrauma include bulging eyes, as pictured here, as well as crystallized eyes, which is essentially just gas bubbles in the eye of the fish. And barotrauma basically acts as a life jacket for these fish and makes it extremely difficult for a fish to swim back to depth on its own. So even fish with barotrauma that appear lifeless at the surface can survive. There have been quite a few long-term tagging studies that show high survival of fish that are quickly repressurized and released back down to depth. And descending devices work great for getting these rockfishes back to the bottom. So we use descending devices proactively whenever we encounter a fish that needs a little help getting back down to the bottom. Pictured here are 3 different descending devices that we have on board for our moss landing trips. The Ace Callaway, or the black tip, employs a heavy weight to return a fish back to depth and is really good for a big rockfish like a vermilion. The weight holds the tool's jaws together, clamping around the fish's jaw. You then lower the device until the weight hits the ocean bottom, which opens the tool's jaw and then releases the fish. Pictured in the middle, the Sequelizer descending device is a pressurized device that you can tie to the end of a fishing rod. You clip the device onto the lip of the fish, as seen with this canary rockfish, and drop the fish back down to depth. And it has a pressure-activated trigger, which will release the fish at a preset depth. And then there's always the classic inverted weighted milk crate, which allows you to descend multiple fish at a time. These are just a few of the descending devices that are available that we typically like to use. And in the event that you do encounter a fish that you can't keep, we think that it's really important to have one of these descending devices on board your vessel so that the fish can be safely released back to depth. And a common question we get on our fishing trips is, well, why can't I use my own tackle? Well, standardization and reproducibility are key here. So during the early planning stages of our program, we had many discussions with the angling community and the charter vessel captains to pick gear types that are representative of the fishing gear used by recreational fishers in that area. And you can see that that the gear types used in each region are consistent. However, there are some differences among regions. But there is one gear type that is consistent across the entire state, and that's our baited shrimp fly. And by keeping our gear types standardized among sampling regions and having a consistent gear type across the state, we're able to compare data on a state and regional scale. So in Central California, we use unbaited shrimp flies, baited shrimp flies, and a lead jig. And you might ask, well, how does the catch vary among those 3 different gear types? Does one gear type catch more fish than the other? That's a really good question, and we've actually looked into this. And in short, there isn't much of a difference. So this pie chart depicts the distribution of catch among the 3 different gear types used on the Moss Landing sampling trips from 2007 through 2020. And the blue slice of the pie chart depicts the percent of fishes caught on the lead jig. The yellow slice depicts the percent of fishes caught on the unbaited shrimp fly. The red slice of the pie chart depicts the percent of fishes caught on that baited shrimp fly. And ultimately, this chart shows that the total number of fishes caught is fairly similar among gear types. And when we break this up by year, you can see that the total number of fishes caught is fairly similar among gear types for each year of sampling. Now, with that being said, there is a difference in the species composition that each gear type catches. So when we break this catch up by species, you can see that certain species are caught more often by certain gear types. So these are the top 10 most commonly caught species across the Moss Landing Marine Lab sampling areas from 2007 through 2020, and the percentage of raw numbers caught on each of those gear types. So the lead jig tends to catch a greater proportion of copper rockfish, lingcod, olive rockfish, and vermilion rockfish compared to our 2 shrimp fly gear types. While the baited shrimp fly gear type tends to catch a greater proportion of canary rockfish, China rockfish, and gopher rockfish compared to the bar and unbaited shrimp fly. And the unbaited shrimp fly gear type tends to catch a greater proportion of those schooling fish, so the black rockfish, blue rockfish, and yellowtail rockfish compared to the bar and baited shrimp flies. And before we take a really quick break, I wanted to briefly review the past 2020 sampling season, as well as give you a summary of the work that's been done to date here at Moss Landing. So as we all know, 2020 was a challenging year to say the least. And through many all hands on deck meetings and the implementation of strict sanitization and social distancing protocols, we were fortunate enough to have all of our CCFRP monitoring groups out on the water to conduct their sampling. And I'm really excited to share some preliminary summary totals from that 2020 season. And these are just a few of the many pictures that we were able to capture during these trips from all of our different monitoring partners. So statewide, we were able to complete a total of 70 trips where we caught and released close to 17,000 fishes from 54 different species. Our Central California region, highlighted in yellow right there, caught the most fishes this year with over 7,000 fishes surveyed, followed by our Southern California region in red and our Northern California region in blue. And the Southern California region saw the most species in 2020 with 34 different species. They added 2 new species to our species list, the giant sea bass and sargo. And then zooming in on the areas surveyed by Moss Landing, so Año Nuevo and Point Lobos right here, we were able to complete 6 trips out to both of those areas. And at Año Nuevo, we caught and released a total of 1,162 fishes from 17 different species across our MPA and reference sites combined. And at Point Lobos, we were able to catch and release a total of 2,155 fishes from 20 different species in the MPA and reference site combined. So it's a very, very successful season. Now, zooming in on Moss Landing in total, so collectively across 2007 through 2020, so those 14 years or seasons of sampling, we've had the opportunity to work with 9 charter boats, collaborate with 16 skippers out of 4 different harbors in the Central California coast. And we've completed 230 days of sampling with the tremendous help of over 800 volunteer anglers who spent 7,000 hours of fishing to help us catch and release close to 77,000 fishes from 53 different species. And of those fishes, we tagged and released over 23,000. So as I keep saying, this work would not be possible without the help of our really valuable volunteer anglers. So thank you. And with that, we can take a quick break. If you guys have any questions or any comments, be more than happy to answer them right now. And then we'll move on into our data section.
We do have one question in the chat from Kevin. He asks, are there any measures of weather impact on individual sampling trips? I remember the weather and wind making the fishing very difficult on one of the anomalies Nuevo trips, Año Nuevo trips, I believe.
Yeah, so we do keep track of all those drifts. We do keep track of the weather, so wind speed and things like that. And it did kind of impact our catch rates, especially there were a couple of days out at Año Nuevo that the weather probably did impact our catch rates for sure.
Also, to follow up on that, I've been doing some analyses with looking at wind in particular, and we definitely can see effects of wind on our overall catch rates. And you guys will see the data in just a little bit, but we'll see how Año Nuevo fared this past year.
All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, I guess we'll move on to our next section. Um, but before we do that, I want to raffle off another prize. So the next prize we have up for grabs, modeled by wonderful science crew member Katie Siri, is one of our CCFRP hats. So let me pull the prize wheel up. All right, drum roll, please. All right, John, you are the lucky winner of a new CCFRP hat. So Jackie is going to message you shortly to coordinate getting that hat to you. Congratulations. All right, so with that, I'll pass the presentation over to postdoc Dr. Shelby Ziegler, who's been playing around with a lot of our CCFRP data and is going to walk us through some of the data trends that she's seeing and talk to us about both the statewide and Moss Landing data. So Shelby.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, hi everyone. So excited to be able to talk to you today about the data that we have and how we're utilizing it. Before I jump into the data, I just wanted to quickly cover what the CCFRP data are used for. So we actually are able to use our data for a variety of different reasons, and they contribute to management efforts such as stock assessments and MPA management, which you'll hear a little bit more about later from Sarah and Mike. So really, I just want to focus in on these stock assessments. In particular, we are able to give them data that helps them understand how these rocky reef habitats are functioning for these rockfish and other groundfish species. For example, in 2019, the gopher and black and yellow rockfish stock assessment was done, and our data were directly contributed to this effort. As well as the MPA management, the data that we're working on now are going to be contributed to that decadal review, which you will learn more about later today. So to start off, we just wanted to discuss the difference in the number of species across our different management areas, so Año Nuevo and Point Lobos. So these figures here have both the reference site and the MPA. And the big picture I want you to get is that different species are contributing more or are found more in different areas. So at Año Nuevo, we see a really large proportion of black rockfish and blue rockfish compared to our other species. However, in Point Lobos, about 50% of the species we catch are blue rockfish, and then about 25% of the fish we catch are gopher rockfish. And so this just gives you an idea that there are different species and different amounts of those species across our areas. When we break it down a little bit further into our MPA and reference sites, we see even among those within one area, we do see differences between the MPA and the reference site. So at Año Nuevo, the MPA is really dominated. About 70% of our catch are blue and black rockfish. However, when we look at the reference site, there's actually a lower proportion of black rockfish and a higher proportion of gopher rockfish caught in this area. When we look at Point Lobos, we see that the values are fairly similar. At the MPA, our two most dominant species are the gopher rockfish and the blue rockfish. But when we go to our reference site, we do see a big increase in the proportion of olive rockfish that are caught at Point Lobos across all years sampled. Now, I'm going to dive a little bit more into the trends from the data we catch. But first, I want to talk about the metric. This is catch per unit effort. And so this is the number of fish caught per angler hour. And so to calculate angler hour, we use the total amount of drift time. So that 15-minute drift times the number of anglers that are fishing. So that this past year we had 6 anglers on our boat. So it would be 15 times 6. And then if you guys remember during our surveys, we're really vigilant about taking the amount of time that people are off, such as when there are snags, we subtract that time off so that we can get a really good metric of how many fishes we catch per angler hour. And so to give you an idea of how catch rates are changing through time, or our CPUE is changing through time, I wanted to show you these different figures. So here in this figure on the y-axis, we have our CPUE, or our catch per unit effort, and our x-axis we have year. And then our red dots are going to be the MPA, and the blue are going to be the reference site. And at Año Nuevo, you can see that these values, although they are increasing through time overall, the reference site and the MPA are fairly close together. And in a lot of cases, we actually see more fish in the reference site than we do in the MPA. This year in 2020, you can see those values are really close together. For Point Lobos, on the other hand, we see that the MPA always has higher CPUE than the reference site, and the difference between the MPA and reference site has really increased in the past 5 or 6 years, where we're catching many more individuals than in the reference site. So next I wanted to dive into some species-specific trends. So specifically, I'm focusing for all of our species-specific trends. I'm going to be talking about blue rockfish because they're a high amounts. We catch a lot of blue rockfish across both of our regions. Lingcod and vermilion because they're fish that we really enjoy and are recreationally important. So for the blue rockfish at Año Nuevo, you see those trends are fairly similar, where the reference site and the MPA have similar catch per unit efforts of blue rockfish through time. And there was a big peak after 2015, but those values seem to be decreasing. For lingcod, we see that the MPA is always higher than the reference site in the catch per unit effort for lingcod. And there was a really big peak between 2011 and 2016, where the MPA catch rates or CPUE was much higher than the reference site. And we think this might be due to increased recruitment into the area. For vermilion rockfish, somewhat similar to lingcod, we always see that there are higher CPUEs of vermilion rockfish in the MPA compared to the reference site. And in the past couple years, we've really seen a big change between those two areas where there's higher CPUE in the MPA than in the reference site. If you want to go back, at Point Lobos, we actually see really different trends than what we're seeing at Año Nuevo, where blue rockfish in particular have really jumped, and we see a very large increase in the CPUE in the MPA compared to the reference site since 2015. For lingcod, we see a similar trend to Año Nuevo, where in those intermediate years between 2011 and 2016, there was a large peak in the CPUE of lingcod in the MPA compared to the reference site. And again, with vermilion rockfish, we see a similar trend too, where vermilion rockfish has much higher CPUE in the MPA compared to the reference site in the most recent years. Next, we wanted to talk about the lengths of the fish. So here is going to be an average for all the sampling years we've done from 2007 to 2020. And what I want you to get out of this is for our top 8 species, on average, we see that fish are bigger in the MPAs than the reference sites, or they are approximately the same. There is never, for all these fish, we never see smaller individuals in the MPA compared to the reference site. So using both those CPUE values, so the catch per unit effort and the length data, so for each individual fish, we measure their lengths, we're able to calculate what's called a biomass per unit effort, which is kilograms per angler hour. And this is a really good measurement because it allows us to directly compare with the amount of pounds or tons of fish that are caught in a recreational or commercial fishery. And so we just utilize this to understand how big the fish are and how that is going to be changed by MPAs. So for the next few figures, I'm going to be talking about this BPUE, or biomass per unit effort metric. And when we look at the total community, or all the fish that we catch in the MPAs, we do see similar trends to what we saw for the CPUEs. However, at Año Nuevo, we actually see that even though our catch rates were sometimes lower, our biomass is higher. So that means although we might not be catching as many fish, the fish we are catching tend to be larger. So in the most recent years, we see that Año Nuevo has higher BPUE in the MPA than the reference site, although these do track through time. At Point Lobos, again, there's much higher BPUE in the MPA than the reference site, especially since 2014. Again, this might be due to some species-specific trends that we're going to dive into. So here we see for Año Nuevo, blue rockfish, our BPUE values really do track with one another in both the MPA and the reference site. While there was a large increase in BPUE for both those areas between 2016 and 2019, that seems to have dropped off a little bit. For lingcod, we see a very similar trend to what we saw with our catch per unit effort, with our biomass per unit effort, where biomass in these intermediate years between 2011 and 2016 was much higher in the MPA compared to the reference site. And again, with vermilion rockfish, we see BPUE on average is higher than in the MPA than the reference site, and that seems to be diverging through time, where we're getting more biomass in the MPA compared to the reference site. For Point Lobos, we see different trends than Año Nuevo. However, we are seeing that across all three of these species, there is always higher biomass per unit effort in the MPA compared to the reference site. For blue rockfish and vermilion rockfish, these patterns are similar, where there's much higher BPUE in the more recent years than in the initial years compared to the reference site. And again, with lingcod, we see that peak in those intermediate years where there's much higher biomass in the MPA compared to the reference site. So next, we really wanted to understand, and these are some new analyses that we're doing, is what does this mean for the effect of the MPA on the fish community? And so we're going to be using that biomass metric for all the fish that we catch to understand how positive effect or negative effect the MPA is having on these fish communities. For this, we use what are called log response ratios, but what you need to know is if the value is above 0, that means there is a positive effect of the MPA on fish biomass. And the more positive it is, the bigger that effect is. And if the value is below 0 or negative, that means that the reference site has more biomass than the MPA. So there's lower biomass in the MPA compared to the reference site. And as that gets more negative, that would mean that there's a even less of an effect. So basically what I want you to get from these figures here is that in Año Nuevo and Point Lobos, there are on average a positive effect of the MPA on fish biomass, and that these values seem to be increasing through time. So since the time that the MPA was implemented, there is increasing biomass inside the MPA compared to our associated reference sites. And we do see some variability where there are a few years where it's below that line, so that the reference site had higher biomass. And we believe this is due to especially at Año Nuevo, there was a huge influx of black and blue rockfish that are moving through the areas in some of those years where we caught them in the reference site compared to the MPA. But on average, we are seeing positive impacts on fish biomass from the MPAs compared to the reference sites. So the one thing we are trying to do now is assess what environmental and external variables might be driving the responses of fish biomass to the MPAs. And so something we wanted to understand was, how does external fishing pressure or fishing effort influence our responses of fish to the MPAs? So here we were really lucky to work with CDFW to calculate fishing effort through the recreational surveys. So specifically, the surveys we use for here are the private or rental boat surveys. And what we did is we overlaid these different micro blocks on top of our associated reference sites to calculate the number of angler days that are averaged and fished for these areas. And so we could compare that to the values we're finding within our MPAs. So what we found from this analysis is that when fishing effort is higher, so there's more fishing pressure near an MPA, you actually see a more positive effect of the MPA on fish biomass compared to areas where fishing pressure is low. And so this figure here is for all of the Central Coast, including Point Bouchon and Piedras Blancas, but we see that at Point Lobos and Point Bouchon, where there's higher fishing pressure, we actually see more positive effects of the MPA on our fish biomass compared to our reference sites. So now I'm just going to touch briefly on some of our statewide data. So this is going to include years 2017 to 2020, and we're just going to give you quickly an idea of what biomass, so that BPUE value looks like across all of the sites that we sample. So this is a little bit complicated, but I highlighted each line with our regions, so the North, Central, and South management regions. And again, the MPA is going to be that red value, and the blue is going to be that reference site value. And what I want you to take away from this figure is that on average, across all the MPAs that are being sampled across the state, the MPA has higher biomass per unit effort for our total fish community than our associated reference sites. And there is variability in those biomasses across the state, but we are seeing more biomass on average in the MPA. So next we wanted to take those values and we wanted to understand again that effect size. So is there a positive effect of the MPA or a negative effect of the MPA? And what we see is that for most sites, we do see positive effects of the MPA on this fish biomass compared to the reference site. And you can see that at places like Cape Mendocino in the north, there is some variability where it was below that 0 line, indicating that in some years the reference site had higher biomass, but there does seem to be an increase where we are seeing more positive effects now. And another thing that I want to point out is for our Southern California regions, such as Swamis and South La Jolla, there was really low overall biomass within those MPAs. However, we're still seeing a really positive effect of the MPA on biomass. So even though the biomass isn't very high overall, we're still seeing a really big impact of the MPA on this fish community. So I think with that, I will take any questions. And I know I see one in the chat right now. So they asked, why do we think the Año Nuevo MPA and reference fish numbers are similar, but so different for Lobos over the years? Oh, that is a great question. So it just has to do with a variety of different reasons and environmental variables in particular. So again, one we talked about was the external fishing effort, where there's a lot higher fishing pressure outside of Point Lobos. So potentially that's driving those big differences between the MPA and the reference site compared to at Año Nuevo. It also could be due to our overall species composition, the types of fish that we're catching. And then lastly, part of Point Lobos was actually an MPA long before the establishment of the 2007. And so that might be influencing the number of fishes that are in that area where we would see more biomass because that MPA has been implemented for a longer time compared to the Año Nuevo MPA. But there's a variety of reasons that could be. Besides that, we could look at things like the currents, the water temperature, and also especially in this past year, as we mentioned before, those weather days where it was really windy. And so maybe just our overall catch rates were much lower and it made it more similar between the MPA and reference site. But there's a lot of different reasons, and I'm happy to talk about this further if you have any more questions.
All right, any more questions before I move on to the next section? Okay, well, next up, we're going to have science crew member and graduate student Jake Todd walk us through some of our 2020 tag recapture highlights. So Jake, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Shelby, for that walkthrough of all the data and how we've been using it. So along with understanding the effects of MPAs, another main use of CCFRP data is using our tag recapture data to track the fine scale movements of different fish species that we frequently catch. So here we just have a picture of a vermilion rockfish that's been measured, tagged, and ready to be released, as well as a couple pictures of the tagging process itself. On the bottom right, we have a picture of a biofoul tag, which is a tag that has algae living on it. Therefore, these tags are not always clean and easy to see like the blue or yellow ones in the other pictures. Thus, if you're out fishing on other fishing trips, we ask that you please keep an eye out for these tags, as they may be easy to miss, and that you please inform your friends to keep an eye out as well. So as a part of our tagging program, we have a couple different flyers that we distribute to the public and different fishing communities and fishing companies. So on the left is a flyer that we have online and we've distributed to everyone, like I mentioned. And it's kind of provides some background on the tagging program and what to look for on the fish they catch. And if they do happen to catch one of the tagged fish, it kind of has a list of metrics and information that we would like them to record. And on the right is a information form that we create and distribute to fishermen who do report tagged fish that they have caught. So we provide some brief history and background on that fish species, as well as information on that specific fish, such as when and where it was first caught and tagged, where we released it, and how big it was when it was first tagged as well. Now I'll discuss some of our tag recaptures from this past 2020 sampling season. In total, we had 18 tag recaptures. These recaptures consisted of 1 black rockfish, 1 vermilion rockfish, 11 copper rockfish, 1 yellowtail rockfish, 1 brown rockfish, and 3 lingcod. And 12 of these recaptures were on our CCFRP sampling trips, and 6 were reported from other chartered fishing trips. Just highlighting some specifics regarding some of our tag recaptures from this past season. Our first recapture highlight is a copper rockfish, which we first tagged in August of this past year within the Point Lobos MPA and was originally caught by Sherry R, was subsequently recaptured around 1 month later in the exact same cell by KDS. Next, we have another copper rockfish, which was caught in 2017 in the Point Lobos MPA. It was originally caught by Benny R, and it was recaptured 1,086 days later by Paul B within that same MPA cell. One of the 3 lingcod tag recaptures that we had this past year was this female lingcod, which was originally caught and tagged in 2019 by Kevin G within the Año Nuevo reference area, and was recaptured by science crew member Jackie M, also in the Año Nuevo reference area. And during this fish's 393 days at liberty, it grew a total of 4 centimeters. This copper rockfish was originally caught within the Point Lobos MPA in 2018 by Ken Y and was recaptured in that same cell by John C, growing 2 centimeters during its 706 days at liberty. And our last 2020 tag recapture highlight is once again another copper rockfish, which was caught in 2019 by Ross W in Point Lobos and was then recaptured by Radon S, ultimately growing 1 centimeter during its 328 days at liberty. So just some more brief highlights regarding some of our CCFRP tag recaptures from this past season. We had 2 copper rockfish, which were both tagged and released on September 19th of 2017 within the Point Lobos MPA, and they were both recaptured in that same cell on August 12th of 2020 for a total of 1,058 days at liberty for each fish. We also had a black rockfish, which we tagged on August 8th of 2019 within the Año Nuevo MPA and recaptured it on August 18th of 2020. And this fish grew 5 centimeters during its 376 days at liberty. And lastly, we originally caught and tagged a vermilion rockfish within the Point Lobos MPA on August 13th of 2019 and recaptured it exactly 1 year later on August 12th, 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, we did have 6 tag recaptures, which were caught on non-CCFRP fishing trips. So one of these recaptures was a yellowtail rockfish, which was originally caught and tagged in 2017 off of Cypress Point. And this fish was then recaptured this past year on a charter boat and traveled 6 miles to Pacific Grove during its 1,159 days at liberty. And another charter boat tag recapture we had was a copper rockfish, which was originally tagged and released in 2016 in the Point Lobos reference area. And this fish was then recaptured 1,501 days later, making this our longest at liberty recaptured fish of this past 2020 sampling season. So as you just saw, many of our tag recaptures this past season were copper rockfish, which were first tagged and then recaptured within the same cell. But other species, such as black rockfish, have much larger home ranges or migration patterns and may travel many miles within 1 year. So this map is just a subset of some of our black rockfish, which we've tagged and have been recaptured. And as you can see, many travel north up to the coast of Oregon, as shown by the black lines. And all of these fish were originally caught and tagged at either our Point Lobos or Año Nuevo sampling area. The furthest traveled fish swam 611 miles and was originally tagged in August 2013 in the Point Lobos reference site and was recaptured in March of 2014 near Hecatebank, Oregon. And that is the purple line on the map. And it reportedly grew 2 centimeters during its 194 days at liberty. Thus, because these fish can travel such long distances, accurate reporting of recapture location is very important so we can further understand how these fish are moving. And understanding how these fish species travel is also very helpful in assessing spillover from the MPAs and how the MPAs are affecting other fisheries or benefiting the other fisheries. And before we dive into the next section, we'll take a quick break and I can field any questions. All right, guess there's no questions, it looks like. Maybe we can move on or.
All right. No questions for Jake? Okay, well, then I guess we'll move on to our next section. But before we do that, I want to raffle off one of our CCFRP t-shirts.
Real quick, Rachel, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
We just have one question.
Oh, perfect. Let's go back.
Go ahead and unmute Kevin here so you can ask it.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. It looks like most of the recorded recaptures are in the same cells or fairly close. Is that the case for most of the fish? And have you captured or recaptured any fish much further away from where they were initially captured historically?
Yeah, so as you saw, most of these were copper rockfish. So that's kind of more dependent upon the species. So some of the species like coppers and vermilions tend to kind of hunker down on the bottom and have a smaller distances they'll travel. So they are most often recaptured within the same cell. But the other species, the more schooling, more pelagic rockfish species like the blacks and the blues, we have had farther, we could potentially recapture in different cells. And as you saw with the blacks, we've had reported recaptures all the way up in Oregon. So that traveling distance kind of normally just depends, and recapture location kind of varies from species to species and how the certain species will travel more than others.
Okay, and are you finding that the experimental data is confirming this sort of idea of which species are more migratory than others?
Yeah. So I remember I was looking at the copper rockfish recaptures, and they moved. We have precise GPS locations when we recapture them, and it was moving 0.2 miles. So we're finding lots of these more benthic species are pretty much staying exactly where we've originally captured them, and the other more pelagic species do travel quite the distances.
Okay, and then I guess the corollary to that would be, would you see enough migration so that they would move out of the protected cells to repopulate the surrounding areas, which I'm guessing is sort of the motivation behind creating these protective areas, is to rebuild the populations at large?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we were looking at the spillover effects, which is essentially how the fish are traveling outside of the MPAs in the reference area, or into the reference areas. So that's where lots of our the commercial and recreational fishing trips, those tag recaptures become very important in the accurate tagging location or accurate recapture location. So we can completely kind of understand how the MPAs are spilling over into the reference areas and benefiting the other fisheries.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a little bit to what Jake was saying. And in our lab, we've done a lot of work in the past surgically implanting acoustic sonic transmitters into fishes and tracking their movements. And if you look at the results of our work and other researchers' work, there's a big difference in the species and how far they move or what their home range is, as Jake said. And one of the species we've worked with a lot is black rockfish, and we routinely see black rockfish showing up off Oregon, Washington, and even into British Columbia that we've tagged in this area. So that's quite a bit different than the copper rockfish, who seem to be more resident. So there's a big difference among species, but with all species, we've learned over time that the things that involve determine the distance they move and the rate they move are the species, the size of the fish, and the time at which they're at liberty. So for all the species we've tagged, we'll see a small proportion of them move larger distances, much larger distances than the rest of them. So in your question about will they spill over from MPAs to replenish areas outside, the answer is undoubtedly yes. And for some species, it will take longer because not many of them move, but over time, I'll just say 10 to 15% of the animals will move greater distances than the rest of the population. And so the three things that influence the spillover effect are going to be the species, the size of the fish, and the time of protection in the MPA. Over time, all of the species will move out and replenish themselves. That's in addition to the replenishment that will occur from the larval distribution, the spawning and settlement of the larvae outside the MPAs.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. All right. Thanks, Jake, for going through some of our tag recaptures from this past season. We'll move into raffling off this CCFRP Moss Landing t-shirt. Pull the wheel up. All right, drum roll. Is it gonna work? There we go. Oh. All right, Jim R. That was a close one. Jim R, you're the lucky new winner of a CCFRP t-shirt. So Jackie is going to send you a message via email to coordinate getting that shirt to you, and we'll also get your size. Okie doke. So moving on, so All of this information is really great, but ultimately, how will the CCFRP data be used? So fortunate for us, we have Marine Ecosystems Program Manager and Tribal Liaison at the Ocean Protection Council, Mike Esgro, and environmental scientist for the Marine Protected Areas Management Project at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Sarah Warden, who will walk us through a bit of that today.
Thanks, Rachel. While you're pulling up the slides, as Rachel mentioned, my name is Sarah Warden. I'm an environmental scientist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I work on all things MPA. I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of you on the water during the 2019 season, but unfortunately, most of the department scientists were grounded last year. I'm sure you can guess why. So before I dive in, I just really want to, on behalf of the department, shout out a huge thank you to all of the volunteer anglers in the CCFRP program and all of our monitoring programs, to be honest. You know, when the pandemic hit last year in March, that's right when we would be mobilizing to start getting out there to collect data. So the thought of losing an entire year's worth of data sort of leading up to this 2022 review that I'm about to talk about was not a very good feeling. So watching everybody just adapt and kind of the passion involved and just really getting out there was very humbling. And, you know, the department just wants to send out many, many thanks. And hopefully we'll be able to get out there again with you all soon. So today I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what is going to be the first decadal management review that we're planning for 2022. So the reasoning for that timeline is the department is mandated to give a review of the MPA program and the network to the Fish and Game Commission currently on this sort of decadal timeline. So because implementation of the network was completed in 2012, that's why we're aiming for 2022. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what our vision is for this review and currently the work that's underway to prepare for it. This review will be an informative update to the Fish and Game Commission about the status of all 4 of these main focal areas of our MPA management program, which are outreach and education, research and monitoring, which of course is where CCFRP really slots in, enforcement and compliance, and policy and permitting. And then a big part of this is really going to be looking at the network, evaluating the network performance towards fulfilling the goals of the MLPA. So next slide, Rachel. Thank you. And I apologize, this isn't the most Zoom-friendly slide if I'm not in control. So there are some animations. So I'll just say next slide and we can click through that. So there's going to be several components that will help inform the review, including on top of just each of the 4 focal areas. So next slide. The first, of course, is going to be all of the research and monitoring results. This will include comparisons between all of the baseline and long-term monitoring data. And the CCFRP data, of course, will be a core component of this part of the review. And before I move on to some of the next components, I'd just like to pass it to Mike Escrow at OPC to see if he has anything to kind of add under this component.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Mike Escrow, I'm the Marine Ecosystems Program Manager, and yeah, Tribal Liaison at the Ocean Protection Council, and we're basically the governor's advisor on coasts and oceans. So we work very closely with the department on all things related to MPA management, a bit more on the policy side of things, the department obviously being the management agency, but we are deeply involved in supporting DFW and all the prep for the 2022 review. And yeah, I mean, first off, I just really want to echo Sarah's thanks in terms of all the work that you guys have put in for the last year, especially. We did have a chance to get out on the water with Rick and some of the science crew in September of 2020. So that was awesome. But usually we like to get out a bit more often than that. So hopefully next year, get some more opportunities. But yeah, on the research and monitoring side, I mean, I just wanted to reiterate that in addition to CCFRP, we have several monitoring projects underway right now that are really getting at that central question of the review that Sarah mentioned, which is, are these MPAs meeting their goals, right? Are they meeting the goals of the Marine Life Protection Act? And so we're going to be looking at that through these monitoring projects from both an ecological and a human dimensions perspective, and really trying to understand what monitoring data can tell us about MPA performance. So DFW and OPC have sort of taken a stab at translating the broad goals of the Marine Life Protection Act into more scientifically tractable sort of quantitative questions. And those questions have been just recently expanded and kind of refined by an independent scientific working group. So we feel like we're working with a pretty good framework, sort of evaluate MPA performance, like I said, and the research and monitoring projects that we have going on right now will be a major part of that. And I also just wanted to mention, I mean, I think, as you've seen, especially from Shelby's presentation, CCFRP data is really at the leading edge, especially because it's been on the Central Coast, it's been going on for so long. We have a really good time series that's helping us track these changes inside and outside MPAs. And so among all of these monitoring projects, one of the most important ones here in terms of evaluating MPA performance is CCFRP. So, thank you guys so much again for getting out there. I just, wanted to reassure you and let you know that your data is being used and will play a central role in this 2022 review. So I think that's maybe enough about monitoring. I'll pass it back to Sarah to talk about some of the other aspects of the review.
Great, thanks, Mike. So next slide, Rachel. So of course, we'll be working very closely with our California Native American tribes through many avenues to integrate their great work that they're doing with MPAs into the review. Next slide. So stakeholder input is going to be a very key component of this review, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about angler-specific stakeholder input coming up, so I'll get back to that. But there'll be many ways for you to engage, and we'll be checking in early and often. We will have a lot of CDFW coordination kind of internally. We'll be working very closely with our law enforcement division for enforcement and compliance data, and of course, we have rich, robust data sets on the fisheries component, which is going to be kind of integrating the MLPA with the Marine Life Management Act as a part of this review. Next slide. So Mike just mentioned some of the science advisory teams that are working closely with us. We have one that's really digging into the monitoring action plan and expanding upon all of the science questions to really help us look at the evaluation of the network. And another that's working specifically on climate change science and MPA science and integrating the two. So both those working groups will have some recommendations for the state to incorporate into our 2022 review. Next slide. And all of this work to date, we really do like to say in the department that we don't have to have the answer to every question for this first review or ever. I mean, that's the thing. It's always going to be an evolving, really exciting discussion around MPAs. So we will be identifying a lot of the gaps of knowledge and many additional questions to kind of address and tap into after the 2022 review. So that'll be a big part of it. Next slide. So all of this will kind of help us guide kind of the next, once we get through this first phase of long-term monitoring, all of this work is going to really help us guide and figure out future monitoring strategies. And then we'll basically be taking adaptive management recommendations to the commission for a big part of this review. I really want to stress that we don't anticipate this to be an adoption hearing, and the commission is not going to be expected to take any formal action. So it's very unlikely that we will see changes to the MPA network as a result from this first review, because this is really kind of the first evaluation of all the hard work that's been going in over the last few decades. However, the commission may consider directing the department to pursue some of these adaptive management recommendations that we'll have towards the end of next year. Next slide. So I mentioned that we're going to be engaging with our stakeholders and that all of your input is going to be very important to this review. So I just wanted to kind of summarize some of the key resources for all of you to stay up to date with what we're doing as we roll this out. So of course, the Fish and Game Commission meetings are a great way to engage with both commission staff, the commissioners, and department staff. You can check their webpage for meeting schedules. They do have kind of general comments, public comment at the top of every meeting. So even if there's not MPA related stuff on the agenda for that particular meeting, you can still show up and put in your 2 cents and engage with the commission. And I should mention that the Ocean Protection Council meetings are also public, so they don't happen as often as the Fish and Game Commission meetings. That's another great place to engage with the state. OPC recently funded 2 communications plans So those are just hitting the ground, and we'll really be digging in with an organization called Strategic Earth. It's going to help us. Some of you may remember them from the planning process. They've worked with us before. They're really going to help us pull together these very kind of targeted audience strategies, which will include engaging and working with the recreational anglers and all of you on kind of how to integrate your input to this review. So as I mentioned, that's just hitting the ground. So stay tuned for more information on that. Some of you are already involved in your local MPA collaborative, but that's another great way to engage and kind of interact with other people who are working on MPAs just locally. So you can check out the MPA Collaborative Network website to see which local collaborative you might be able to get involved in. They meet about quarterly, but they send out regular updates and newsletters, and we'll be working very closely with them on everything leading up to this review. Of course, staying involved in CCFRP. I don't anticipate any of you guys going anywhere. So that'll be a great way to stay engaged. We'll be updating all of the monitoring programs and working closely throughout leading up to the review. And then the department, we publish updates and blogs and all kinds of things about MPAs through our marine management news. So if you don't already get that newsletter, you can sign up there. And then of course we have an askmarine@wildlife.ca.gov email address that you are always welcome to send any inquiries or questions through that venue. So before I wrap up, I think there's one more slide, Rachel. We don't have a lot of time today for discussion and questions, but I'm happy to take a few. This is me and Mike's contact info, so you're welcome to reach out directly to us with questions or inquiries about the 2022 review. And like I said, this is not going to be the last time that you hear from us, and we're really looking forward to just working with the anglers and getting your input into this kind of really important milestone. It's going to be really exciting. So Mike, I don't know if you have anything to add before we kind of wrap up, but.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, just feel free to get in contact with us, and yeah, I mean, we really see stakeholder involvement as being a key component of this review. So don't be shy in terms of reaching out, and we'll be, coming to you guys with more formal avenues for engagement as this all unfolds.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah and Mike. Does anyone have any questions for the two of them before we go on to our next section? Don't be shy. This is your opportunity to ask the big guys.
Well, there'll be lots more opportunities.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
People tend to be a little quieter on Zoom, so feel free to reach out with us if you need to kind of ponder the mass amount of information I basically just spilled on you. Thanks for having us again today too.
Yeah.
Oh, we're so happy to have you guys participating. This is awesome. All right. Well, if you guys have any questions, we'll also have time at the end of the presentation, so you feel free to ask then. We're gonna move on to our next section then, and we're making really good time. We have another spin the wheel to raffle off some prizes. And it was brought to my attention that there's two anglers that weren't in attendance for those first two prizes. Jackie, which prizes were those? Was that for the buff and the hat?
Correct. Yeah, the buff and the hat.
Okay, so we're going to do 3 spin the wheels in a row. And we'll just re-raffle off those prizes. So first off, to start off, we'll raffle off one of our hats, once again modeled by wonderful science crew member Katie C. So I'm going to pull the wheel up. And let's see who the lucky winner of this hat's going to be. Is it going to work? All right, Dave H. Is Dave H. here? Hard to tell with everyone's screen names. Dave H., are you present?
If you're present, yeah, maybe just say yes in the chat box.
or throw up your hand, either one. Awesome. Dave's here. Okay, perfect. So Dave, Jackie's going to be sending you an email to coordinate shipping off or shipping you your hat. And we're gonna raffle off another hat. If you didn't win that round, chances are better this time. Mark A. I don't know if I saw Mark in the videos. Mark, are you here?
He's here.
Oh, he's here. Perfect. Awesome. Well, Mark, you just won yourself a CCFRP hat. Congratulations. Okay, and then finally, we're going to re-raffle off one of, or that neck gaiter. So here we go. Okay, Paul B. You are the brand new owner of a CCFRP neck gaiter. Congratulations. All right, well, let's move on to our next section of today's workshop. All right. So while all this data is important to our coastlines and our understanding of MPAs, there is clearly one metric that is very, very important. And that is who caught the most fish. So we're going to go through some angler statistics from not only the past sampling year, so 2020, but also throughout the entirety of the Moss Landing program. So Jake's going to go through that. Take it away, Jake.
All right. So to begin this fishing stats section, I'm going to start with the total number of caught fishes throughout the entire history of our Moss Landing CCFRP program. So in first place, we have Dave K who's caught a total of 3,632 fish, followed by Daryl B with 3,357 fish, and Lester Y with 2,587 fish. So now we'll kind of talk about the stats for this past sampling season. So this is the average number of fish caught per trip. So in first place for this past 2020 sampling season, we have Sherry R, who ended up catching a whopping average of 120 fish per trip, followed by Tim S and Michaela M with 97 and 89 fish per trip, respectively. Now moving into, we'll have the stats separated by, so this is also the average number of fish caught per trip for people who have been on at least 5 trips with us. So in first place, we have Bill S catching an average of 68.23 fish per trip, followed by Josh A with 59.9 fish per trip, and not close behind is Manny P with 59.4 fish per trip. This next statistic is separated into our 2 sampling areas, so the Año Nuevo and Point Lobos, also with a 5 trip minimum. So for our Año Nuevo area, sampling area, in first place, making a reappearance on the leaderboard, is Manny P with an average of 57.2 fish per trip. In second place, we have Richard K with 55.6 fish per trip. And in third place, we have Bill S with an average of 49.9 fish per trip. And moving into the Point Lobos sampling area, in first place, we have, once again, Josh A with almost 70 fish per trip, followed by Ben E with 54 fish exactly, and John C with 43.17 fish per trip. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Rachel, who has a couple more fishing metrics to discuss with us.
Thanks, Jake. So obviously, you know, catching fish, you know, whoever catches the most fish, that's definitely very important. But one might say that whoever caught the largest fish also is a top contender. So we'll go through and look at who caught the largest lingcod and the largest vermilion across the past 14 seasons of sampling with Moss Landing. So our reigning champion for the largest vermilion rockfish is Gary Kay with a whopping 58 centimeter vermilion that he caught last year in our Año Nuevo reference area. And he also made the top 10 2 additional times with 2 different 56 centimeter vermilion rockfishes that he caught also once again last year, both in that, I think they're both, in the Año Nuevo reference area. So this kind of begs the question, is he a vermilion magnet? We'll have to keep a closer eye out in years to come to really get down to the bottom of that one. We also have a new addition to the leaderboard this year. Lester Y made it onto our top 10 with a 55 centimeter vermilion rockfish that he caught in the Año Nuevo MPA. So big congratulations to Lester. So looking at lingcod, I wanted to start off and highlight Ken Y, who joined the top 10 with his 96 centimeter lingcod that he caught in 2019 from the Año Nuevo MPA. So awesome job, Ken. And while we didn't have any lingcod to add to the leaderboard from our 2020 season, I do want to highlight an honorable mention, Paul B, who was just 2 centimeters shy of making it onto that top 10 largest lingcod list. With his 91 centimeter lingcod that he caught in the Año Nuevo reference site. So you were so close. Better luck next year. And it's really important to catch big fish, but it's also really entertaining when we bring on board some of those smaller fish. So next, I'm going to highlight those of you who brought in the tiny little fish over the 14 years. So this year we did have someone added to the leaderboard. Andrew V caught a young of the year rockfish pictured up in that top left picture. He's in the red sweater. You can barely see that young of the year being cradled in deckhand Zach's hands. So that fish was a whopping total length of 8 centimeters, and it was caught and released in our Año Nuevo MPA. So we also had some very unique catches for 2020. So one of which was a transitioning California sheephead, pictured up in the top right, being held by science crew member Jake T. And this fish was caught by Radon S. And it was caught and released in the Point Lobos MPA and is one of the first ever sheephead caught on a Moss Landing CCFRP trip. So really, really unique catch. Another unique species that we encountered a few of this year were the ocean whitefish. And this pictured here is Matt W. I think also John C. caught a couple ocean whitefish, and all of them are caught in the Point Lobos MPA and reference sites. So that was really cool. And some honorable mentions to our unique species list include Whitney Yu, who reeled in this Izenia stipe with, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a purple sea urchin attached. And he managed to do this without breaking his rig. So I thought that was pretty impressive. Additionally, I'd like to acknowledge David O, Dave K, and Rick A for their Sea Star catches, which were safely released after being pictured. And before we wrap things up, I just want to do a plug. So we calculated the CPUE for you guys, or your average catches, across every year that you've been participating with the program. So if you're interested in getting your 2020 catch data or data prior to that, please send us an email at ccfrp@mlml.calstate.edu, and we can share that information with you. And with that, I'm going to pass things back over to Jake, who is going to go over the Central California 2021 fishing regulations.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So now that we've discussed our fishing stats, rockfish season is about to begin here on the Central Coast. So I'd just like to go through some of the CDFW regulations for this upcoming season, just to make sure we're all following the correct guidelines. However, it is important to note that I'll only be discussing the regulations here within the central management area. So if you will be fishing in Southern California or in any of the northern regions, I'd ask that you please refer to the CDFW website and their ocean regulations pamphlet for those guidelines for those areas. So here within the central management area, rockfish, cabezon, kelp and rock greenling, and lingcod are all closed to fishing between January 1st and March 31st. And you can't fish deeper than 30 feet or 50 fathoms. However, this depth limit is enforced using a series of connected waypoints. So if you will be heading out on a private boat, I would recommend that you look up those waypoints ahead of time just to ensure you're fishing in the correct areas. So as has been the case in previous years, you still cannot retain any of the following species: bronze spotted rockfish, yellow eye rockfish, or cowcod. And as we mentioned earlier, rockfish suffer from barotrauma and are very susceptible to dying without having the proper descending gear aboard the vessel. Thus, because some of these prohibited species may be encountered, we would highly encourage you all to keep a descending device aboard your vessel in the event that you do catch one of these species. And these species have been overfished in the past, so helping their survival could be very beneficial to future populations. But there have been a couple new changes to the regulations for this upcoming season, one being the elimination of certain sub-bag limits for black rockfish, canary rockfish, and cabezon. However, a new sub-bag limit for vermilion rockfish has been added, so you can now only keep 5 vermilion rockfish per person, with the total daily bag limit of rockfish still being 10 fish per person. And has been the case in previous years. The minimum size limit for cabezon is still 15 inches, 12 inches for kelp and rock greenlings, and 22 inches for lingcod. And you can retain 2 lingcod per person. So that pretty much covers it for some of the new rock fishing regulations for our central management area. However, if you still have questions, I would encourage you to take a look at the CDFW website, where there you can find an online regulation booklet like this one in the picture, and you can download for your use for on your phone or on your computer. And also, here are a couple of phone numbers which may be useful to you all. The first number is the Groundfish Regulations Hotline, and the second number is the CalTIP hotline, in which you can report poachers and polluters to the department.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. So to finish things off, we're going to do 2 more raffles. So the first raffle, or the first wheel spin, is going to be for a CCFRP t-shirt. And let's see who the lucky winner is going to be this round. All right. Dan S., are you here today? Is Dan here? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, there's no Dan, so we're gonna re-raffle off that CCFRP t-shirt. Serena, I think I saw your name in the wall of videos. Serena, are you here today? Awesome. All right, Serena, so you're the new proud owner of a CCFRP t-shirt. As I've said earlier, Jackie's going to send you an email, and we'll coordinate getting you your shirt and getting you the right size. And we'll raffle off, we'll do one last raffle for one of our CCFRP buffs. Is Mike here? Mike I here today? I don't know if I saw
Mike's
him
not
here.
here.
Okay. All right, well, let's try one more time. So for a CCFRP neck gator. People are losing out on prizes. Bonnie R.
Bonnie's here.
Bonnie's here. Yeah, I thought I saw Jim's name. Congratulations, Bonnie. You just won a CCFRP neck gator. Jackie's going to shoot you an email and we'll work out shipping that prize to you. Okay. Oh, sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties. So I just want to say one last thank you for everyone for joining us today. And if you want to stay up to date with CCFRP and get up to date information on what's going on with Moss Landing, as well with all our statewide collaborators, please make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CCFRP. And finally, I really want to extend a huge thank you to our funding agencies, our collaborating institutions, and the captain and crew members of the CPFEs we've had the pleasure of working with. And most importantly, this program would not be possible without the dedication and support from all you amazing volunteer anglers. We wouldn't be able to collect the data that we do. And so from the bottom of my heart, and from all of us here at CCFRP, we really want to extend a huge thank you to you.